there's a small detail you might have missed in the opening line of the book of Isaiah. It says, "This is the vision of Isaiah, son of Amos, which he saw in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah concerning Judah and Jerusalem." The prophet Isaiah is fixated, he is captivated by the city of Jerusalem. And the story of Jerusalem, or Zion, is told in the opening chapters of the book, chapters 1 and 2, which kind of serve as the introduction to the whole book. So the city of Zion, it is chosen, it is elect, set aside by God for a specific purpose. But then let's take a look at chapter 1. So the city, it was a faithful city, but how it has become a whore. It used to be full of justice and righteousness was in her, but now murderers, and her princes are rebels, the companions of thieves. And therefore, the Lord declares, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one, he will send a fiery judgment upon the city of Jerusalem. And this is a judgment that will both destroy but also purify. Look at this. It will smelt away your dross. It'll get rid of all of the bad elements. It'll remove all of your alloy, and it will leave a righteous remnant. Afterwards, after the judgment, you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. That's what she was like at the beginning. And now again, after the judgment, she will be called the faithful city. And that's the story of Jerusalem. And it is a story that Isaiah is going to tell again and again and again throughout this book. The sin of Jerusalem, her judgment, but then a righteous remnant preserved through that judgment, and then great promises of restoration given to that remnant. And this story of Jerusalem is repeated for us in chapter 6. You remember Isaiah's amazing commission. Let's slow down and look at Isaiah's commission together. See how the story of Jerusalem is told there. Now remember, in the year that Uzziah died, Isaiah saw this amazing vision of seraphim with 6 wings crying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts." And then his guilt is taken away with a burning coal, which burns, but it cleanses and it purifies and it atones for his sins. That's curious. I wonder what that means. And then he is commissioned. God says, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And Isaiah says, "Here I am, send me." And this is his message, and it's not a very positive message. The message Isaiah is to preach is that Israel is to keep on hearing, but not to understand, to keep seeing, but not to perceive. Rather, their heart is to become dull by listening to the prophecy and the preaching of Isaiah. And naturally, Isaiah is going to be like, "Oh, how long do I have to have this kind of fruitless ministry among this nation which I love?" And Yahweh says, this is how long: until cities lay waste without inhabitant, and the land is desolate, and Yahweh removes people far away. Well, that's interesting. And this right here, this is referring to the judgment that will come by Assyria, the destruction of the northern tribe, and the desolation of the south. 46 cities are laid waste in Judah as well, and Israel is removed far away. And look at this: a remnant will remain, a tenth will remain in the land. That is referring to the southern tribes, Judah. So after Assyria takes Israel out of the land, Judah is going to remain as a tenth, as a remnant within the land. But that remnant will be burned again. So first we have Assyria is going to chop down the tree, ka-chung, and then the giant tree of Israel is going to fall down, but there's going to be a stump, and that stump is Judah. But then Babylon's going to come in, and it's going to get out his big old thing of oil and lighter fluid and pour it on the stump and light a match and set it on fire. So Judah will be burned again. But there will be a remnant even after the destruction that's coming by Babylon. As like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled, so the holy seed. This word seed is very important. Zerah, seed or offspring. It'll come back in a huge way in 40 to 66. So we'll pay attention to that. Well, great promises are going to be made to this righteous remnant that will come on the other side of judgment. And to look at those great promises, we need to jump back from chapter 6 to chapter 2. And this is such an important chapter, you guys. So Isaiah chapter 2. Now you'll notice that this introduction is the same introduction that we have in the very opening of the book. It's the vision of Amos, or the vision of Isaiah, son of Amos, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. This is the word that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. So it kind of sets chapter 1 apart, but then still binds it together to chapter 2. And look what he saw. Shall come to pass in the latter days, this is the eschatological future purpose of God for the city of Jerusalem, that the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the highest of all mountains, and all nations will flow to Jerusalem. And they'll say, come, let us go to Jerusalem, because I want to learn how to follow God's ways, his paths, his law, his word. For the law, the Torah, the instruction of Yahweh will go forth from Zion to the nations. And he, I wonder who this he is, he will judge. That is a word for, for righteous rule. He will judge between nations and decide disputes for many peoples, and there will be universal peace throughout the world as a result of his righteous rule. That is the purpose, the final purpose of God for the city of Jerusalem. It is amazing. This is quite literally, no pun intended, a mountaintop moment here in the book of Isaiah. It is a pinnacle, and the rest of the book of Isaiah is going to look back to Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 to 4, and it will build upon that restoration portrait, which is presented first in these verses. Now, changing gears for a moment, one thing that you're going to learn about the prophet Isaiah is that he is very intentional with how he crafts and how he structures and designs and arranges his oracles in this book. So this oracle of restoration, which we just read, happens to be a bun in a Day of the Lord hamburger. So you know that with a hamburger, you got a bun, and then the meat in the middle. Well, we have the restoration of Zion as the bun in the burger, and then in the middle we have the Day of the Lord judgment against that city of Jerusalem, which will happen first. So I think that this structure, this little hamburger structure here, is designed to communicate a relationship between the judgment and the restoration. It's saying that the judgment of the city is aimed at, or it has the intention of producing the eventual result of the restoration of that city. And I think that point is made very clear in chapter 4. Let's take a look at this. This is another one of those unfortunate chapter divisions where the chapter really should have started in verse 2, where it says, in that day, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious. And what did we read about in chapter 6? A holy seed coming out of a stump. So here's this more plant imagery here. The branch of the Lord will be beautiful, and it will be glorious. And the fruit of the land will be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel. Now, what does survivors make you think of? It makes me think of a remnant that survives through the judgment, all who is left in Zion or who remains in Jerusalem after this judgment. They will be called holy when Yahweh has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and cleansed the bloodstains of Jerusalem in the midst of a spirit of judgment and a spirit of burning. So this judgment described in the Day of the Lord in 2 and 3 is designed to produce this restoration. And let's just keep reading because it's amazing. Because over Mount Zion, God will return again with a cloud by day and fire by night, and there will be a canopy of glory permanently just beaming out light above the city of Jerusalem. It's amazing. Well, the next block in Isaiah, 5 through 10, it's going to follow the same structural design, literary design as 1 to 4, where we got another hamburger. We got another hamburger going on in 5 to 10 here. But this time, the themes are reversed, where we have judgment as the bun and kind of like kind of like restoration a little bit as the burger here in the middle, but really it's more of a narrative following the faithlessness of Ahaz and God's promises through Isaiah of great restoration to come, even despite the faithlessness of Ahaz. Well, I think that the opening poem in this section, I think it's 5:1 to 7, explains why there is a disproportionate emphasis on judgment here in this second block of Isaiah. You see, God, he describes Israel as a vineyard which he just totally set up. He made it as the most legit vineyard you ever saw. And he comes to this vineyard after some time looking for grapes. But what does he find instead? He finds sour grapes. He finds wild grapes. I think in the Hebrew, it literally means stinky or smelly grapes. He looked for justice, it says, but he found bloodshed. He looked for righteousness among the city in his vineyard, but instead, all he heard was an outcry. Therefore, Yahweh says, I will come and I will tear down my vineyard because it's not producing the fruit that I want it to produce. And that destruction of the vineyard will be carried out by Assyria, the rod of God's discipline. And that discipline is described then in these woes and refrains in 5b and chapters 9 and 10. But I want you to look at how Isaiah presents these warnings of the vineyard destroyer, which is Assyria, how he presents them, because it's rather interesting. You see, there are 7 woes that he pronounces against Israel in the north and Judah in the south, coming by Assyria here in these chapters. There's 7 of them. Let me show you kind of how they begin in chapter 5. So here's the poem of the vineyard, and then in verse 8 it begins, woe to those who join house to house, who buy up all this land, try to make themselves rich. Woe to those who rise early in the morning and run after strong drink. Woe to those who draw iniquity. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who are wise in their own eyes, who are heroes at drink. That's pretty funny. And then at the end it says, for all this, his anger has not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still, holding the rod, which is Assyria. Now, if you were counting, you probably only got to 6. There were 6 woes here in the second half of chapter 5. And that is because number 7 is on the other side of this crucial narrative. Let's jump now to chapters 9 and 10. To look for that number 7. Oh, there it is. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees. And then look, the refrain is back. For all this, his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. And we scroll up. For all this, his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. His hand is stretched out still. His hand, holding the rod of judgment of Assyria, is stretched out still. So it appears as if, don't you think? It appears as if these 2 sections were originally together. They were originally one packet of judgment oracles against Israel and Judah, but somebody took those judgment oracles and ripped them in half and placed this narrative in the middle. Isn't that curious? Why did they do that? Well, these woes foresee wave after wave after wave of judgment coming from Assyria. What are we thinking when we read about all of this judgment, judgment, judgment on the city of Jerusalem. We're thinking, where is the promise of restoration, which you had here in chapters 2 and 4? How will the branch, remember, how will the branch become beautiful and glorious if it is crushed, if the vineyard is crushed and stamped on by Assyria? Well, that is what this narrative is placed here to answer. And we already saw in chapter 6 how this judgment from Assyria is just the beginning. Because afterwards, after Assyria cuts down the tree, well, then Babylon's going to come and he's going to light the stump on fire. In chapter 10, we noted in our first lecture, records the faithlessness of Ahaz, who refuses to believe that Yahweh can save him from the Syro-Ephraimite coalition, and instead he trusts in Assyria. So that's a pretty dumb idea, isn't it? Well, Isaiah is going to warn in chapters 7 and 8 that Assyria may protect you now, but it's going to destroy you later. Now, all of this sets up and is the context into which chapter 9 is preached, is prophesied. And chapter 9 is the critical hint of restoration here in the midst of all of these woes. Let's turn to chapter 9 together. Scroll up. For there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. Because in a former time, he brought contempt to the land of Zebulun and of Naphtali. Now, pull out your maps. Where is Zebulun and where is Naphtali on the map? They're way up north in the top of Israel. And when Assyria comes to destroy Israel, who is Assyria going to take out first? Zebulun and Naphtali, the tribes in the northern areas of Jerusalem. So that's the former time. In the latter time, he will make the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations, he will make that glorious. Galilee. When was Galilee made glorious? When did they see a great light? I wonder. I have to turn to the Gospels to figure that one out. Well, there will be great joy and rejoicing and gladness because in this latter time, the yoke of their slavery will be broken, and a son will be born to him. Now, there are 4 sons in this narrative section, and the relationship between them is a little bit confusing, but it all culminates here with this son that is born and a child that is given to us, and on his shoulders will rest the government. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish it and uphold it with righteousness and with justice. This is amazing. This is phenomenal. This is the person, we're told, through whom Yahweh will decide the disputes of the nations and through whom he will teach the Torah to all the peoples of the earth. So we're given more hints of restoration here in chapter 9. Okay, so let's return to this critical chapter 6, where we learn that Assyria is going to chop down the tree of Israel, and Babylon's going to burn the stump. Well, what is going to happen to that lumberjack? The lumberjack that is Assyria, chopping down trees left and right. Well, chapter 10 is going to answer that question for us, where it's going to pronounce its own woe. But now the woe isn't going to be on Israel. The woe is going to be on Assyria. And this woe has a pretty neat and intricate design. And I would be remiss if I didn't show you that design. So let's take a look at a chart here to see how Isaiah pronounces a woe on Assyria. See this? It kind of has this ABC pattern where there are these speeches and this pompous pride of Assyria in A, but then God is going to come and he's going to burn Assyria's forest. He is going to cut it down. And then after that, we're told of a remnant which will survive on the other side of Assyria's judgment. And I love how Isaiah's mind works. It's so fun to see it at work here in the transition from chapter 10 to 11, where in the end of chapter 10, we're just told that God will cut down the forest of Assyria. And then what do we get in chapter 11? You probably know. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, a branch from his roots will bear fruit, and he will be filled with the Spirit of God, and he will decide disputes. In wisdom and in righteousness will he judge the poor. You see, here we are in chapter 11. This is the branch of Isaiah chapter 4. This is the stump of Isaiah 6:13. Now it's connected explicitly to the line of David from the stump of Jesse. And then in chapter 11, we're swept up into God's great, amazing plans for the ages, where he says that the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and the ox will eat straw, or the lion will eat straw like the ox. And then this prophecy will continue to speak, and it makes the connection that with the coming of the king of Israel, so will be the healing of the people of Israel. And look at this in the end of chapter 11. And this is critical for the next section here, for he says that in that day the Lord will extend his hand and recover a remnant among the people, among all of these people. They're in brown. And this will be critical for the next section. And that section is the oracles against the nations in 3 to 27, specifically through chapter 23. Now, there are several prophets who have sections of oracles against the neighboring nations, where so some of them, of course, we have Isaiah. Jeremiah has a section of oracles against the nations. So does Ezekiel, Zephaniah. And in these oracles, the prophet will turn their attention away from Israel and Judah into the injustice and the pride and the arrogance and the violence of the nations which surround Israel and Judah. But this block of material here in the book of Isaiah, it is far from random. You see, every nation which is listed here is a nation to which Israel is exiled, but which they're promised to return. Let's return to chapter 11. I hinted at this earlier. So all of these nations, Assyria, Egypt, Cush, Shinar, which is Babylon, the coastlands, think about Tyre, the Philistines, Moab, all of these nations are going to make it in the list of those God pronounces judgment against. So that's a pretty interesting connection. Now, these oracles of judgment are all, they're strictly historically rooted. They are rooted in the time of the Assyrian threat, specifically under Ahaz. And let me give you a couple of examples of how these oracles are rooted in those events of the 7th and 8th century, starting first with Philistia in chapter 14. All right, 14. So, Philistia. Philistia is going to send messengers to Judah, and they're going to ask Judah to join another alliance, right? There's so many alliances happening. They're going to ask Judah to join an alliance with Philistia against the Assyrians. And when Judah wisely refuses to join that alliance, Philistia is going to rejoice. They're going to rejoice over Judah when Judah is basically becomes a slave of Assyria, when they become a vassal. Philistia is going to be like, ha, 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 ha. See, I knew that would happen to you. Look how much you're paying taxes. Stinks for you. But Isaiah is going to tell Philistia, do not rejoice, but rather wail, cry out, melt in fear, because Assyria is going to come and destroy you as well. Let's look at another couple of examples. So why do you think that Syria and Israel are going to be addressed together as a unit? Probably because of the Syro-Ephraimite coalition, which is the main focus of this whole section in 1 to 12, and specifically 7 to 8. So in chapter 17, Syria, or Damascus, the capital of Syria, is addressed. Let's look at chapter 17. Jump down to 17. An oracle concerning Damascus, that is Syria, and the glory of Jacob, that is Israel. Well, both of these groups are going to be destroyed by Assyria. The remnant of Syria will be like the glory of Israel because their fortresses will disappear and they will become a heap of ruins. Let's do another example. This time, Egypt and Cush, and these guys are addressed in chapters 18 to 20, and they're kind of lumped together as a unit as well. And honestly, these ones are pretty confusing, a little bit tricky. But let's jump into chapter 20. So in the year 713, Philistia, whose capital is in Ashdod, Philistia is going to rebel against the king of Assyria. And then, of course, Assyria is going to send a commander to fight against Philistia and capture it. And why is this relevant? Because Philistia is going to invite its neighbors to the south, Egypt and Cush, to join this rebellion against Assyria. Remember, I told you there's all these alliances going back and forth. And Hezekiah, we're jumping now into the future. Hezekiah is going to go to desperate lengths to try to, or excuse me, Isaiah is going to go to desperate lengths to try to convince Hezekiah not to join this alliance against Assyria, but rather to trust in God alone. And what are these desperate lengths? Well, Isaiah is going to loose the sackcloth from around his waist. He's going to take off his sandals, and he's going to walk naked and barefoot. For how long? For 3 years, he's going to walk naked and barefoot as a sign against Egypt and Cush, saying, you know what? You trust in Egypt, you trust in Cush. Well, this is what Egypt and Cush is going to look like. They're going to be naked when Assyria hauls them off to captivity. Why would you trust in them? So that's kind of a crazy image. Well, you can probably come to see why reading the prophets is so difficult. So much of the material is just rooted in this historical minutia of the 7th and 8th centuries BC, but their content is not limited to the 7th and 8th centuries. Now remember, what is the ultimate fate? What is God's desire and intention for the nations in chapter 2? Well, it's that all the nations would come up to Zion and learn the Torah of Yahweh. Well, alongside the judgment of these nations, there are hints of restoration. And take a look at this chart of these chapters and the hints of restoration that Isaiah is just going to sprinkle throughout these 11 chapters. So let's see, down here. Here we are, oracles against the nations. They kind of have their own unique pattern here, but notice here in green, the moments of redemptive hope that Isaiah will sprinkle throughout. And I want to focus especially on the restoration hope for the nation of Egypt, because it is particularly beautiful. Look at this. It's the end of chapter 19. I have it all kind of highlighted in pink here for you. So in that day, think about the coming day with the restoration. The cities of Egypt will swear allegiance to Yahweh, and Yahweh will make himself known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will know Yahweh in that day and worship him with sacrifice and with offering. And Yahweh will say of the Egyptians, they are my people, alongside, look at this, the Assyrians, and of course Israel, which is Yahweh's inheritance. Well, this model of judgment alongside restoration is going to be picked up on a grand scale in Isaiah's apocalypse in chapters 24 to 27. And these chapters form the conclusion of his oracles against the nations, because the judgment and the restoration, which is called upon specific individual nations in 13 to 23, is going to be extended to the whole of creation in these chapters 24 to 27. Let's see how this judgment is just expanded to all nations in all the earth here in chapter 24. Isaiah's apocalypse. For now, we're going to begin with judgment here in chapter 24. The Lord will empty all the earth and make it desolate. The earth will be empty and utterly plundered. The earth and the world will mourn, and it will wither. It will be defiled because it has transgressed the laws and violated the statutes. Well, judgment will not only be against the kings of the earth, but also against the host of heaven. Look at verse 21. On that day, again, we're looking into that future, Yahweh will punish the host of heaven in heaven and the kings of earth on the earth. So the host of heaven, we're talking about those rebellious, evil, spiritual forces, the demons who rebelled against God. They too will be judged on this day. Well, remind me, what is the pattern that Isaiah has been preaching from the very beginning of his book? After judgment, there will be a righteous remnant carried through, and they will be promised fantastic promises of restoration. Now, I want you to look at the total reversal of Isaiah chapter 5, the vineyard poem, in chapter 27, this restoration and reversal of the destruction of the vineyard. It's really neat how Isaiah will pick up these themes. Let's jump down to 27. In that day, a pleasant vineyard, chapter 5, will sing of it. I, the Lord, am the keeper of my vineyard. Every moment I water it. Let's see, I keep it night and day. Man, I wish I had thorns and briars to battle, because I would go to battle against all of those thorns and briars. I would march against them, that I may protect and lead in peace my vineyard. And look at this. In days to come, Jacob, the vineyard of Yahweh, will take root, and it will blossom, and it will put forth shoots, and it will fill the whole world with fruit. I think that's a sign of Israel finally becoming a blessing to the nations, sending out its fruit to all nations. I'm in fulfillment of Genesis chapter 12. Well, this blessing is going to flow from the capital city of Jerusalem to those nations. And here, throughout his apocalypse, Isaiah is going to tell the tale of two cities. There's the fortified city. There's the lofty city, the city of pride, which will be laid low. But then there is the mountain of the house of the Lord, and that will be a place for the gathering and the healing of the nations. Look at this. And by healing, he's going to mean resurrection. Chapter 25. On this mountain, the other city, the Lord of hosts will make for all people a feast of rich food, of well-aged wine. Think about the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he will swallow up on this mountain death. Death will be swallowed up. God will wipe away all tears from all faces. Now, I think that is a good place for us to pause for now. In our next lecture, we're going to pick up where we left off in 28 to 39 next.